go live? Okay. All right, welcome to Manitoba Music's Touring Without Breaking the Bank. My name is Elise. I work here at Manitoba Music as the Professional Development Coordinator, and I'm joined here by Miesha from Miesha and the Spanks.
Hello.
And this is Carrol from First Date Touring, Living Hour, Real Love, all of the things you could ever imagine that would be important in the music industry. So thanks for being here, first of all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, and but I'd like to just have each one of you talk briefly about your journey, what how you got started, and how you got to where you are now.
I started just really liking live music a lot, and I would book all ages punk rock shows in my small town in Invermere, BC, which kind of led me to start my own punk band so I could play with those cool bands that we had coming through from Calgary and stuff, and kind of had a nice center there. So I got to know the Calgary music scene really well, because Invermere, BC is about 3 hours from Calgary, and it's kind of a sweet little tour stop if you're on your way out to Vancouver. And so from there, when I turned 18, I moved to Calgary, and I started just playing a lot in the regular scene, picking up guitar. And because I kind of had this onset idea that touring was the thing to do from helping out other bands when they came through my town, I just picked that up as where I wanted to start going. And as soon as I had something promising, that's been kind of the platform with how I run all of my bands and my projects, is to tour Canada as much as I can. And my band right now, Miesha and the Spanks, we're on our 10th year, and we tour a lot. And we just got to record a new album in the UK with the drummer from the Buzzcocks, which is really exciting, which was a connection I made from playing festivals. And so, yeah, I guess playing live is kind of the main thing that I do all the time.
Cool. I got started sort of just playing in not very good bands in high school, and got into more booking stuff right after I graduated high school, just sort of booking local shows at like random restaurants and bars for my bands and my friends' bands. And then sort of I lived abroad for a year, and then when I came back to Winnipeg, I started Real Love Winnipeg with my friend Adam, and we put out a compilation album with a bunch of local artists, and sort of from there built a community of bands that sort of all became friends and collaborators and played together live shows. And sort of that grew, and now we have a festival that happens every summer, and we do a bi-monthly showcase at the Handsome Daughter, a local venue. And then we also started with our friend Bucky, who plays in Royal Canoe, First Date Touring, and that's a small boutique booking agency, and we book tours for bands in Canada and the US mainly. And we started that just because we felt there was a need for that, for some access for independent bands, sort of like our own bands and our close community, and it's sort of grown from there. It's really hard to get a booking agent, and especially if you're an up-and-coming band. And we sort of had our ear to the ground and picked up a few exciting bands, or bands that we were excited about, and have been working with them and sort of growing and developing them. And it's been a really cool experience, and we're getting better and better. It's been a long process for sure, making the right connections and that kind of thing.
Cool, thank you. So before we get right into this, I just want to kind of know where everyone's at as far as touring. Who has toured before? Okay, so a lot of the room. Okay, awesome. So that'll kind of help us direct our conversation a little bit better. So I think one of the common questions that people have is, how can you effectively tour, without going broke, or not even just broke, but without going completely insane, because it's really difficult to do. It's really difficult to balance your life at the same time. So that's really what the main thing that we're going to talk about today. But how do you determine when is the right time to tour?
I think beginning to play out of town just for weekenders is a great thing to start anytime, as soon as you're playing any shows, because building those connections, touring like you could put all of this time into making this album and being like, okay, now I'm going to start touring because I've got this album out. And your first tour is going to be not that awesome because nobody knows who you are in that town yet. Like maybe you got a sweet review, but the locals who go to shows, they don't know you yet. So if you start doing that ahead of time, just performing and getting to know those cities and those communities, I think that's a great way to get your foot in the door for before you even do a record yet.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. I think a lot of people will say, oh, you should wait until you have an album out, or you should wait till you have your team in line and everything like that. And I definitely see the value of all of that for sure. But I think it makes a lot of sense just to sort of play out as much as you can, because those connections you make early on, especially like for my band, there's people I met on my first ever tour that like are now promoters in those cities, or they play in like cool bands that have connections. And so it's really about meeting people early on, I find. So if you're just playing as much as you can, I think that definitely helps.
Yeah, it's good to just get it out of the way. Like maybe you don't go, Halifax to Victoria on your first ever jaunt out of town, but I mean, or maybe do, if you can afford to. Then it's kind of unrealistic, but if you like wanted a vacation or you're driving across Canada and you play music, like it wouldn't hurt to get to know all those people that early on.
Yeah, so when you talk about it being unrealistic from Halifax to Victoria, I know there's a lot of young bands who maybe wouldn't understand why, or that seems very appealing to them. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. Well, you're not going to make a lot of money on your first shows out of town, and so you're probably going to be picking up your own gas expenses and stuff. So to go the vast region of coast-to-coast Canada might not be the way to go, like I said, unless you are like planning on going on a road trip anyways, and you treat it like a road trip with your friends, and you've planned to lose a lot of money or something on that. But to go that far, like Canada is huge, and the drives are huge, and the gas costs a lot of money here. So to do that wouldn't be realistic for those kinds of money reasons. So
how do you reckon, I know you said maybe do some weekend things first. How often should somebody maybe start out doing that?
It depends on how many cities and towns you have surrounding you. Like if you're like here, what would your weekenders be like? You could do like Regina and maybe Brandon. You're not going to do that every month, right? And so like what's the next closest thing is like Thunder Bay. So you've got like one weekend every couple months that you could do if you're going to do that. So don't do it like all the time, like switch it up between locally and that, but do it often enough. Like we're supposed to play locally like every 3 months or so, kind of treat every other city the same. Don't go there every month.
Being based in Winnipeg is really hard for that kind of thing. Like Fargo has a really good scene, and that's only 4 hours, but you need a visa to get there, which is really frustrating. And as a promoter, it's often frustrating that a lot of cool bands will tour and they'll never go farther than Minneapolis north and that kind of thing. They'll often skip over Winnipeg. So that can be a really challenging thing, is like sort of the way my bands have usually done it is like, okay, if we're going to go out on the road, we may as well go for like a few weeks. Because if we're going to drive 9 hours to Thunder Bay, it doesn't make sense to go home. Like
Thunder Bay is not really a realistic weekender, I think, at this stage. Because then what, you got to go 10 hours to Toronto after that? So no, I don't know.
Yeah, I think Toronto's like 18 hours from Thunder Bay. Yeah. It's So we'll maybe expand on that a little bit. With being from Winnipeg and having not a lot of options for weekenders, or do you have any recommendations, Gil, for like what people should maybe focus on and what's affordable for people who live around this area to do, as often as they should?
Well, I guess it depends on the music you're playing, because there definitely are opportunities at venues in Canada that if you plan far enough in advance and you are professional, you can afford to do it. You can get good pay and you can get a meal and maybe a hotel and that kind of thing, even early on, which is really great. But yeah, it can be really challenging too. So I think if you're organized, you can sort of try to do like just a Western Canada thing or just an Eastern Canada thing. I would probably advise against doing like the whole shebang. I think that would take a lot out of you, though.
I agree. I've done that too many times and gone broke too many times. So now we're gonna sort of expand on like why it's so expensive and what we can do to make this a little bit more cost effective, and sort of coming up with some ideas for that. So in your experiences, I guess, what mistakes have you learned from, and what are you doing differently now?
We typically, unless if it's kind of venue that has like a budget, we now always make sure we ask for at least $100 guarantee. Like, it's going to be a door deal typically, but even if that door deal goes south, if you can get like $100 out of a venue, which is really no problem, it is not hard for them to give you $100 for your gas tank and like a meal. My biggest mistake before was not asking for that, like not even bothering, just being like, door deal, we'll see what happens. So asking for that now is a big thing that kind of helps for money that's coming in. And just like preparing with have some money handy, because things can go south and like your van could break down or you're not making any money. Like, I think you should be prepared to cover every expense before you hit the road, just in case.
And that's actually something that Manitoba Film and Music requires when you apply for a touring grant, which is definitely something we could talk about in a little bit, but they make you submit a bank statement with the amount of money that you're saying the tour is going to cost. So if they don't give you the funding, you can still accomplish the tour. And there's some ways around that, whatever, but that's interesting though, for sure. Yeah, we made a lot of mistakes early on, and I think we've learned from a lot of them. And a lot of them have to do with accommodations, not so much the shows themselves, but staying with kind of sketchy people or not having like somewhere to stay and sort of scrambling at the end of the night. And then you end up like paying way more than you should for a hotel, or staying with some like crazy drunk guy. And it can be really bad for the band to have those kinds of experiences if you're not comfortable or feel unsafe or whatever. We've definitely stayed with some unsavory people.
Just to add to the accommodation thing, we have set it up now so that we tour in a van with 2 bunk beds in it, and my band's a 2-piece band, to kind of just elaborate on that. And so no matter what, we're always okay for accommodation, which is a thing to think about, because you can't pay for a hotel every night. That's going to definitely break your bank for sure. So having a sleepable van, which is kind of a luxury that only smaller bands have realistically, is a good way to go. And asking ahead of time. Have you guys heard the band Sam Coffey and the Iron Lungs? Those are good friends of mine, and they, every time they head out on tour now, post on their Facebook page, here's a list of cities, can anyone host 6 guys? So you can kind of plan that ahead of time. You don't end up with like the weirdo at the end of the night who says they can host 6 guys.
Yeah, that's true. I've had the same terrible experiences before, just staying with weirdos.
There's always a lot of cat pee involved.
Mine was dog poop all over the room. Yeah, that was some sort of animal stuff somewhere. So for finding free accommodations, just posting on Facebook, just
asking
around.
If it's Facebook, it's like your friends, or it's a friend of your friend, and it's not someone random. So that maybe you're staying on a weird couch or something, but there's a little more safety involved.
Yeah, or like you can see the local bands that you're playing with, and so something that I do is try to establish a relationship with some of the members of those bands before. So I'll be like, hey, like really excited to play with y'all, like on this date, it's going to be an awesome show. And then they're like, yeah, you too. And then like, yeah, eventually you're like, so like, do you know somewhere that like we could crash? Like maybe not putting it on them, like, will you host us? But like, do you maybe have a friend with like a empty room or something like that, sort of? It's a nice way to do it. And also the shows tend to be better if you establish that connection with the local bands before the gig, because they're sort of more inspired to promote the show because they want you to have a good experience in their city and sort of show you like that they have a good scene.
That's a really good point. Like building relationships with the people that you're doing the shows with is huge. I know, like, even being, you know, in a local band and you get asked to like play with a touring band, sometimes you're like, ugh, like I hope that they're cool or whatever. But if they, you know, if someone reaches out to you ahead of time when they're coming to your city, you're definitely more likely to be like, these people are really nice. And yeah, that's a really, really good point. Let's actually expand on the bands now, the bands that you're playing with. You know, that can really help sort of make or break your tour. How do you find the acts that you're playing with, and how do you make those connections so that your show is good and you do have people and you are making money?
Ideally, there will be a promoter on the show. So when I book a tour, I try to find a promoter before I find a venue, because chances are the promoters know which venue makes sense for your band in their city. I've definitely made mistakes where I've booked way too big of venues, or venues that like had really like next to no sound equipment, like stuff like that. So if you can find a promoter that has put on shows for similar artists or artists that you admire that aren't like huge, that's a really good place to start. So ideally, they'll take on the show and they'll be in charge of finding the local bands. But if they don't do that, which definitely still happens, you can sort of go through the past shows they've done I use Facebook, and see the events. It's like, oh, that really cool touring band from New York played in their city at this venue, and this local band opened. They're probably cool and have a good draw. And then you can sort of look into them, reach out to them. If they can't do it, you can go through their events and see what other local bands they've played with. That's a good way of doing it. Also, bandcamp.com, you can search city tags, and then you can be like, oh, this has like a really cool album cover that speaks to me, and you can like discover a band through that.
Totally. Because you really, especially if you're booking your own tour as the artist, you don't want to also be trying to find bands in every single town to play venues that fit, because you have a lot of other things to do too, right? Like your own publicity, talking to radio stations, everything else. And you have to be driving, you know, and there's just so much else to do other than finding a local band yourself. But another good way to tie it all together, if you do have to do that, which definitely, like Gil said, happens, is like the local radio station is another really good way. Reach out to a DJ who plays the kind of music that you play and ask who the sweet local band that plays that is. I always use like local community campus radio as a huge resource for everything when I'm booking.
I never even thought about that. Always learning something new. Okay, awesome. So actually we kind of already addressed this before about budgeting ahead of time. But besides like the obvious things that people should budget for, is there anything that you've kind of run into that you're like, I really should have thought about that ahead of time?
Kind of like overestimating maybe gear repair, anything going on through gear, losing something, you forgot your bunch of pedals or something in another city, and you got to like, they can't get it mailed to you by your next show or something. Like, you should just really have some excess for anything to go wrong. Gear stuff, van stuff, and your per diems, you know, like kind of give yourself a per diem. Most grants kind of allot you $50 a day. Like, that's what you should expect to spend. And that's like kind of ridiculous. Like, I think on tour, like $20 is probably more what you should be planning to spend. I think, like, kind of.
I would agree, yeah.
Yeah, like when you budget that into your grant, you're like, sweet, I'm going to use $30 a day on gas or something instead, because you're totally not going to eat that, or you shouldn't.
You should not eat gas.
No, eat that.
No, I know.
Yeah, also parking and tolls.
Oh, yeah, totally.
We tour the States quite often, and sometimes tolls are like up to like $18 just to like get into a city, and that's like money that goes pretty quickly that you don't really consider beforehand. And yeah, definitely the gear thing. We never really had issues until our last tour. Right before we played, we plugged in our keyboard into the sound system, and it started smoking out of the keys. And and the keyboard's like part of our sound, and we needed it. And the whole thing ended up costing like $700 to like figure out the whole situation, and that was like money we certainly had not budgeted for, so that really sucked.
I have a question. Have either of you ever had to hire musicians when you're going on tour?
I never have. I've kind of avoided it. I think like when you're touring Canada and you're in kind of an indie band, you've got to have an agreement with your bandmates that you're both prepared to lose money. So hiring someone on and like paying them per show, I just don't know how to expect to afford that. At the kind of shows that you would play in like a rock band in this kind of scenario, like if you're the kind of band that plays a few sets a night and gets paid like a nice chunk of cash every time you do it, you could probably afford to hire somebody. I would make the guaranteed payments kind of low.
Yeah, I'd say we've never done it also just because either we didn't know people or we were like, oh, well, we won't be able to rehearse with them or whatever, or financial reasons. We have started to talk about maybe doing it only in like major music markets. Like if we have like a big show in Toronto where we think there's going to be like some cool label that wants to see us, we're like, okay, well, like maybe if we brought in like this horn section, it would like make our show that much better and we would like stand out. So like maybe if you're sort of like looking at a certain specific performance as like an investment and be like, okay, well, if we have the best show possible here, we might get like X opportunity. That might be a time to look at that. But it is challenging, it's like, because if you're not going to really have time to rehearse with them, it's kind of risky, I would say. But there's a lot of pros that could do it.
Right, yeah. So you would, I mean, if you did something like that in a major music market, you would hire them from that city, right? Instead of paying for travel for someone that you have. Yeah,
like you could hire someone and then send them all the songs you're going to play. Hopefully you have them recorded, and then it's up to you to sort of execute them as close to the recording as possible, because that's what they're going off of. But that's totally a challenging thing to do, because oftentimes, you know, live sets are different than the recording, and that happens all the time.
I have brought like a fill-in before on with me, and I wouldn't say it's quite the same as hiring because I didn't pay them anything to come with me, but I made sure that any losses, those were on me. And their daily food and like some beers at a show. I did that too. Just kind of like an extra expense for me to have someone help me out so I didn't have to cancel a tour. But it's not quite hiring because they just didn't lose a lot of money.
Right. So it's more like, hey, I'm just come on a free trip and play with me, and I'll pay for you to come. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that seems reasonable. Okay. Yeah, because I mean, a lot of people come in and ask me how they're supposed to tour when they're hiring musicians, and I don't know. You know, there is like
no idea
with MFM, which if we have time, we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. But they do have they do have support for hiring musicians if you need to bring them with you or hire them in the city that you're at. But that does get extremely expensive until you're at the point where you're making some pretty solid guarantees. Yeah, which can be really difficult for the solo artists who are amazing with, well, alone, but with the band it's even better. Actually, I wanted to ask you, Gil, how do people find promoters?
A good way of doing it is going through bands that you like and seeing tours that they've done. And sometimes that's unrealistic if like your favorite artist is like some huge pop star, because obviously whoever's putting on their show in a city isn't going to be who's putting on your show. But if you can sort of, well, great question. I feel like the Bandcamp thing could work here. So you say you're going to play a show in Montreal. So you search Montreal in Bandcamp, and then you click the tag, and then you find all the bands that have the tag Montreal. And then you find a band that you like from Montreal, and then you go to their Facebook page or Instagram, and then you look through their photos and their events, and then oftentimes they'll be like, Blue Skies Turn Black presents this band. And then you're like, oh, who's Blue Skies Turn Black? And then it's like, oh, they're this promotion company that does all these cool shows. So it's a lot of like research is basically what it comes down to. It's just like looking into bands and seeing who's helping them out in the city.
And like venues, like a venue that you want to play, if they have a promoter, someone that books there, often same thing. Research Facebook events. Often like the co-host, one of those co-hosts is a promoter.
Yeah, I guess it's like would be like exactly like Real Love or Village Idiots here, and you would easily be able to see that on Facebook. What events are going on. So.
One thing to be careful about when doing that, though, and I've definitely like ran into a couple awkward situations over the years, is like I'll like be like creeping a Facebook event, and then I'll go through the hosts and I'll be like, oh, like this person seems to be involved with a lot of stuff, and then I'll just like cold message them on Facebook, and either they like won't respond or it'll just like be awkward. And so what I do now is if I feel like that's the only way I can connect with them, if I can't find their email or whatever, but I can see that they're like someone who's putting on shows in a city, I'll be like, hey, is there an email I can get to you at about booking a show, or is FB okay?
So important that I like personally, this is my own little vent session now. Communicating over Facebook Messenger is not okay for most people. It's so hard for people to keep track of the messages. It's not an effective way to do business. If you're taking your music career seriously, do it over email. Some people, there are some people where you can only communicate over Facebook, but for sure. And I feel the same way when people send me a Facebook message to ask me about music advice or something. I'm like, what my email address is, but it is nice when people are like, hey, is there an email address so I can ask you this question, or where would you like me to email you, or whatever. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, like I personally don't mind it over Facebook, but I think like if you're getting into stuff like the details of a show and like you're starting to get into the nitty gritty, that's when you should move it over to email, because it's definitely more professional.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. What are some ways that you make extra money on the road? What can you do to sort of increase the revenue besides just the show stuff?
Merchandise is a big one, I think, for sure. And you could save a lot of money by doing a bigger run and getting more, but if you're kind of hitting the same communities, I guess by more I mean like shirts. If you're hitting the same communities and you get about the same size of crowd all the time, you don't want to have only the same t-shirt design. So I would recommend, and what we always do is I do like a 100 shirt run every time we go on a tour, and then I'll do a new run next time we go, because it's a lot of the same people and they're excited to come and get a new shirt or something. And we make a lot of money on our shirts right now on tour. It's kind of what helps carry us through a lot of the time. And and like albums. And also having like some, I guess this isn't really a money thing, but it's kind of a merch thing, but some giveaway merch too kind of helps. Like not everybody has a lot of money, and it will kind of just help promote you for next time. But shirts are definitely a good source of revenue when you're on tour.
Yeah, other than merch, which we don't sell that much of, we don't really have a way of making extra money. But I will say a really, really good thing to do, and will save you a ton of money, is if you're staying somewhere where you're comfortable enough with the people you're staying with, if you can cook some meals as a band, it saves like hundreds of dollars every week for sure. Because if you're buying every meal, it just gets out of hand really quick.
Groceries in a cooler are definitely a good way to travel.
Yeah, making sandwiches or something.
Yeah, even just cold stuff, just like rolling out like an avocado for breakfast or something.
Boil eggs and stink up the van.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I've totally done that.
I think it's like Superstore or a Co-op. They've got like pre-boiled eggs, and it sounds kind of gross, but it's like some good protein while you're on the road.
Don't get the salt and pepper ones that look brown. They're super weird. On the merch topic though, from my own experience, I'll say that having different price points while you're on the road is really good, because there's people who, they don't know you that well. They're not really sure if they want to wear your shirt, but they'll throw $10 on like a little tin with a bunch of little knickknacks in it, or like
a beer koozie, $5 kind of thing. Exactly.
So having like a $5 price point, $10, 15, 20, 25, whatever, that just gives people options, and it does really add up. it's funny because it depends on the band, but the band that I just toured with, it was all about our branding, and we made 3 times more money on selling merch than we did on our guarantees or show money. So that really can be your bread and butter of tour. Another thing I've done with my previous band is we would go busk. We got kicked out of some places. We didn't get any fines, but we also made, like, there was one time we made, $100 in an hour, and we had like a little sign about our show later that night. So you can get kind of creative with those kinds of things. Tip jar. Oh, that's a good idea.
At the merch table?
Yeah, that's from Jenna from Obina Galore. That's amazing. A tip jar. Cool. Actually, yeah, that's, again, like, for people who maybe don't want to buy a whole t-shirt, or like if your aunt shows up and throws a 50 in there, that would be sweet. Awesome. Okay. We're going to probably start asking questions getting audience questions fairly soon. But maybe let's talk about the grants that we do have available. I know, like, with Factor, you have to have gotten the juried sound recording grant, or be a level 2 artist. So maybe we won't talk about that.
But you could tie, if part of your tour includes a showcase, get that showcase grant. That's a general artist thing, and that's like, you get like basically a 900 and something subsidy plus like $100 a person. So as a 2-piece, we kind of max out at $1,035, but that's $1,035 that totally helps out on your tour. Yeah,
so like if you are touring a CMW or something.
Yeah, so it's a showcase that has a conference aspect. So like we just played Rifflandia, and we're able to get that because it's the first year they added a conference to that festival. And Sled Island does it now, and CMW always does, and Halifax Pop. So there's a lot of options.
And Breakout West, which is coming up. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the Manitoba Film and Music Touring Grant?
For sure. It's a really amazing thing and has allowed my bands as well as a lot of friends to be able to tour. Without it, I don't think they would be, or we would be. But yeah, basically it's not that difficult to actually get the grant. But it does require work, and you have to be organized, and you have to really prove to Manitoba Film and Music that you have a long-term plan and you're taking it seriously, and you're really going to go through the steps of marketing yourself and making connections and that kind of thing. If you're just like, yeah, like, we really want to get on the road, like, I've never been to the East Coast before, like, they're not going to fund that. So you really need to, like, be professional. And they say right in their application to go meet with Steven, who's in charge of the music programming there, before you apply. So that's a really good thing to do. It's nice to meet people in person, and he'll give you a lot of great advice, and he'll be able to recognize your application out of the stack if you actually go in there, tell him about your plans and that kind of thing. So that's huge. And then if you are lucky enough to get the grant, which hopefully you all will, it's really important to stay organized on the road with all of the money that comes through. There's little things that, like, you don't always need to keep. You don't need to keep, like, the food receipts and stuff, but you need to keep track of stuff. You just need to pay attention to the details of it, because once you get into that grant system, it's super, super valuable, and it helps you along quite a bit. So everyone should be looking into the Manitoba Film and Music touring support grants if you haven't yet.
Yeah, so that'll cover your mileage, your gas mileage. It'll cover accommodations if you have to pay for them. Although I'll still say that, like, still finding free accommodations is the best thing to do, because they won't cover all of it. So you're still going to be paying out of pocket, and it will help cover the cost of hiring musicians. It'll help you to sort of give yourself some per diems and that kind of thing. But like Gil said, you have to stay organized on the road. There are some receipts that you have to keep, and some things you have to keep in mind for the end with the cost report. You have to show proof of payments. So paying cash isn't the best thing to do. So, again, meeting with Stephen Carrol, who's the music programs manager, is awesome. It's good to make face with him and let him know that, this is what I'm doing. This is my plan. I'm going to be doing this for a while. And he can always guide you. And I'm here to guide you on tour applications. So if you need to know what to include or you need to send it to me and be like, how does this look? I can absolutely do that and let you know if that's valid or if you need to change anything or think about something you're not thinking about. The other thing I find that's awesome about grants when you apply for them is it gives you like a plan, right? Because some people just like blindly go into it. But if you're asking for money, they want to know your plan. And sometimes you haven't thought about the things that they're asking about. So I think it's, there are grant writers out there, but I think it's really important for your career to actually write this out and think it out on your own terms and then ask people like, in your community, is this good? Would you submit this or ask someone like me? I'm just trying to see if there's anything that I kind of missed here. Oh, actually, I was going to ask if you find that social media helps you with promoting your shows and if you put any money into advertisements on Facebook or Instagram when you're going on the road.
I tried a couple times, like buying the ads and stuff, and I didn't notice a huge difference. I feel like maybe it's just the kind of scene that we're in is kind of rock and roll, punk rock. A lot more is word of mouth. So like posting and sharing on Facebook to like our various networks helps, but I don't know if buying has necessarily been worth it for me. So I experimented with it. I wasn't really sold on it.
Yeah, we've done it quite a bit, and what I found is unless you're putting in like a lot of money, it doesn't really do that much, which can be frustrating because you'll be like, oh, like I'll put $10 to promote this event and target people that live in this area, but it just really doesn't go that far. But if you put in like $200 into promoting your event, it could. But then it's like, are you even going to make $200 at the show?
Yeah, and like for every show.
Yeah, we only do it in like I was saying before, like the major markets. Like we have a tour coming up next month, and like we have like an ad on our New York show right now, just because we like want it to be as awesome as it can be, and we know there's so many people in New York that love live music, so we're like kind of like, oh yeah, like let's get the word out there. But yeah, for every show, it would break the bank.
Especially on a tour, like think about all of the target audiences in every city. If you were doing like Western Canada, like 3 provinces worth of people to target to, and how many shows, like at least 6, right? That would get so expensive, I think.
But as a promoter, like I know that shows in Winnipeg that we put on, that we do put a promoted or pay for like the ad on, almost always do better than the shows that don't have them. So if you have any sort of bargaining power with the promoter in that city, if you can be like, hey, like instead, if you like get sent an offer from a venue, you could be like, hey, like instead of this percentage of the back end, so like all the money that's made after all the expenses, instead of like 80%, why don't you give us 50% and put $40 into Facebook ads or something like that. So if you can get the promoter in your city to do a promoted post, that's much more effective than your band doing it, because they have people that are tapped into their events already that go to shows.
That's a good idea. Yeah, actually just knowing that you can sort of make negotiations with venues or promoters, like they give you an offer and a lot of times people are like, yeah, okay. But there have been times when they're like, we'll give you like 150 and free drinks. And I'm like, can we make that 200 and free meals instead? That's the other thing. Always ask for meals if over alcohol. You don't need alcohol. It's fun, but you don't need it. But meals, yeah. And then, like a lot of these places serve like huge portions. You like have 2 meals in one, so it really saves after a while. Sometimes it gets gross if it's hot out, but yeah. Or frozen if it's the middle of winter. Okay, yeah, that's good to know about the ads though, because it's really hard to know if it's making a difference sometimes, and I think a lot of people are asking about that. We actually, now I'm going to plug another workshop. We do have a workshop coming up in October. I think it's the 24th, and it's going to be talking about social media and those kinds of things and how you can make the most effective ads and reach people and all that. So if anyone's interested in that, that'll be a really good one. Okay, so I think that's all of my questions. I'm not going to hog the mic anymore. Does anyone have any? Yeah, okay, already. This is awesome. Okay.
Hi. Do you guys have any tips for solo artists who want to tour?
It's almost kind of easier sometimes. I feel like there's a lot more venues that you can get into, like different cafes and coffee shops could support a solo artist more than like a full loud band. But you have to do like the driving yourself if you don't have like one person accompanying you, and you take on all the expenses yourself if you don't have a network of bands like splitting everything. So I mean, I think it's kind of the most accessible way to go, though, to just like reach out and contact you to play anywhere.
Yeah, and even if your performance is just you, having a friend or someone that's with you to help with the driving or to make sure you're not, getting into any weird situations by being alone, at the end of the night at a show and that kind of thing definitely goes a long way. So if you can sort of bring someone along as like a tour manager or call them whatever you want, but that definitely helps a lot. The thing that's challenging about solo artists is unless you get to a certain point, you're going to like be getting paid less, because oftentimes venues will be like, oh, well, it's like a 5-piece band, so we have to pay them at least this. But if it's just one person, they'll be like, oh, well, we'll just like toss them $50 or whatever. So that's one thing to consider, but your expenses are way lower. You don't have to worry about feeding other people or getting multiple hotel rooms and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually have toured as a solo artist before. And it's way easier than touring with a band for so many reasons. I also made money at the end of it, which is amazing. I think I came back with $600 in my pocket. And I've also been a tour manager I've been a tour manager for a solo artist as well. So absolutely bring somebody with you. But I will also say that having really good merch as well as a solo artist, because it's easier to engage with the audience. That for some reason, when you're up there by yourself, it's easier to have banter with them and to make it like a really intimate experience. And for me, that's when I sold the most amount of merchandise as well, just because they felt super connected to me. It is more fun on the road with a band, but it's easier as a solo artist for sure. Actually, that reminded me of something else to ask the two of you. Because when I did tour solo, I went to a lot of small towns because, like they said, you can play anywhere. And I played like little cafes and little restaurants and stuff. And that's where I found I actually had the most amount of people. And they loved it because they were the ones who bought all the T-shirts because they don't have clothing stores there. Do you have experience? Do you have any experience with that? And like, how do you find small towns compared to the major music markets?
Same sort of experience. Definitely, they're very appreciative. There's not a lot of music coming through typically, and so this is like the event of the town. So everybody's coming, whether or not it's something they thought they would like. They're going to be there, and even like whether or not it's their kind of music. By the end of the show, they're so stoked that you came to play their town. I find like tiny little towns is where you feel the best after you play a show because everyone's so stoked. But it's also where you're most likely going to be the only band on the bill and have like 2 sets prepared, which when you're used to like the hard, fast half-hour rock set is like pulling out some deep cuts.
Yeah, I think it really, really depends on the band. I know that the kind of music my band plays is like quite slow and sad, and we have not been well received in small towns. And so, yeah, but there definitely are a lot of artists that I know of that do super well and can play like 30 shows in just Western Canada because they're hitting every small place. But like with my band, like we really only want to play the bigger cities because we've had some really awkward stuff. Yeah.
Do you also have you played house concerts, and how have those been?
They're pretty fun. They're some of the most fun party shows, and like sometimes you can move some merch. There's this house, or I don't know if it really exists anymore, but there was this house that had a record label in Quebec City called P572, and this guy Sam, who runs the label, would have shows in his basement, and he would like make sure there was like a merch area set up, and he would go and collect money from every person, and so you would move records, and you would make a lot of money off the door, and it was just totally like your regular old basement house party. So you can get like there are some houses that throw shows like that around Canada, and so those shows are a really good place to develop like new friendships with fans. It's pretty one-on-one. There's not a lot of people there, and everyone's in each other's face. And so they can be like pretty awesome, but they can also be weird if it's just like some kid decided to throw a basement show so that him and his friends could drink beers or something. Like they can, like maybe if you're going to do that kind of thing, go with a more reputable or one of your friends or a band you know has played there before. But when they're good, they can be really good.
Yeah, I love house shows. Like up until recently, we played like a lot of house shows, especially in the US, because it's easier to get them booked because you can sort of, when you're first starting out, especially touring in the States, like promoters don't really know who you are, so they have so many bands that are all competing for the same date at the venue. So if you can find someone that's like, oh yeah, like my friend's house has shows all the time, that can be really, really good access to local scenes. And like DIY culture is very, very strong in the US, and there's people that like only go to house shows because like maybe they don't drink or maybe they're not 21. And that's like been amazing. The one thing that's not good is the sound is almost always really bad. So if you're a band that, you know, has maybe more elaborate setup, or you really need to hear yourself well in order to perform well, that can be super challenging. How
did you go about finding the house concerts in the US?
Like the same methods. Like it also like it obviously depends on sort of what kind of band you're in and the bands that you like or look up to. But like even like bigger bands in the US still sometimes are like playing at houses or like more like DIY spaces because the costs of putting on the show are way lower. Like if you're at a venue in any random city, like there's all the door costs, security, paying, you know, the sound person, all that. And so by the time the band gets any money, there's like already tons of that is accounted for. But if you're at a house, maybe they're paying like a guy or a person to do sound, but like probably not. So like all the money is going to the bands, and that's a huge thing.
And to touch back on the solo performances, I definitely have noticed in Calgary, there's a kind of a resurgence of solo artists playing in houses again. And people will charge like $20 for them to come see a solo show at a house. And so I think that's probably a pretty good way to make some money. And it can't be just Calgary. I feel like it's kind of happening all around Canada right now. The old like East Coast kitchen party sort of idea.
Definitely. Does anyone else have a question?
Just going back to house shows in the States, how does that work for your like tour itinerary that you have to, like, is that a venue that you would put on your visa, like for your visa, or?
Yeah. Like usually they have like some funny weird name.
Okay. So
yeah.
They're not like checking in. They're like, oh, this is a.
No, I really don't think that when you apply for a visa that they're actually going through every single one of your tour dates and researching it. And I think you could easily make a case if you were ever questioned about that. It's like, oh, well, you're just in someone's basement. What do you, like, this isn't a professional thing. Like, you could totally make a case for it still being like, this is my performance, this is my art, and this is where it's happening. Like, you can't, yeah, I think it's fine. We've always included it.
That was a good question. The question at the back over here. I should just stay over here now.
You mentioned earlier that there was an instance where your keyboard caught on fire, and it ended up costing you like $700. Like, did you pay for that visa? Like, did you think about maybe like going to a Long & McQuaid or renting something? Like, how did you overcome that hurdle? That's my first question. I have another one, so answer that one first.
It was a unique situation. We were in San Francisco when it happened, and we were about to play, and so we borrowed a keyboard from one of the other bands. It didn't sound anything like the keyboard we usually use, but like there was nothing else we could do at that point, and like we had already taken so long with getting set up because we were trying to figure it out, and then we were panicking and all that. So we were just like, hey, we just need to play. So we borrowed a keyboard then, and then we were actually gifted a keyboard by this guy who was like busking on the street. That's a bit of a long story, but that keyboard was broken. Or like it worked, but it was very out of tune. You know, sometimes keyboards just like will never actually be in tune. So we tried to use that, but it didn't work. So for the next show, we went to a Guitar Center, which is basically the same as Along and McQuaid, and rented a keyboard for that show. And that was super expensive, like way more than I thought. It was like $80 just for the one show, which sucked for sure. And it also didn't sound like anything we wanted. And then we were lucky enough to find a similar, almost identical keyboard actually on Craigslist. And for the place we were like on our way up to Portland. And so we like met this guy who is actually the lead singer of this doom metal band called Yob, which apparently is quite popular. Not sure if anyone's heard of them. You have? Awesome. I had never heard of them, but he was lovely. But he gave us a great deal on the keyboard itself. Because he's like, oh, I'm happy to help out a touring band. Like they've like toured forever. So he was super awesome. The thing that cost the most though was the case, because we were flying. The case for our original keyboard was too small for the new keyboard. So we had to get a custom case made. And I'm not a keyboard person, I'm a guitar person, but I know that oftentimes keyboard cases can be like almost as expensive as the keyboards themselves, if not more. So that's actually what got us, and it was all US funds. So between buying the new keyboard and getting the custom case, we went to like pawn shops and stuff, but we didn't find anything. So we were just like, hey, we need something. So after that and taxes and stuff, it was just a lot of money.
Sub question. Did you ever find out what was wrong with the keyboard? Like, why did it start smoking, and why did it?
It was really old, and the venue we were playing at, it was like not a traditional venue. It was like a comic book shop that like does shows, and it was really cool. But they just like weren't really set up for the show, and like the power bars were like kind of like weird looking. Like we should have known in a way. It's not our fault, but we could have maybe known.
There are some signs.
Yeah.
Red flags. Okay. So the other question is, this is kind of posed to both of you now. When you are setting up your merch, how do you, and you were talking about like shirts and stuff, is there like a flat rate that you have in your mind that you're going to charge for T-shirts? Or, because I know that, Miesha, you said that you usually get like a run of 100 every tour or whatever. Do you just set a flat rate? T-shirts $20, hoodies $35, done.
Pretty much, yeah. That's kind of how I set it up. If I've got like baseball tees and tank tops and plain T-shirts, I'll do the baseball tees and tanks at 20, because no one really wants to spend more than $20 on a shirt, and I'll knock the T-shirts down to 15. But if I only have regular T-shirts, I keep them at 20. A lot of it's for change. We sell like vinyl and T-shirts, and our full vinyl we do 20, and T-shirts 20, and it's pretty easy just to be like $20. Don't have to deal with the change and stuff, and people don't seem to mind too much. So.
And how much do you charge for like your CDs and stuff?
CDs I'll do 10 if we have any. I really only order CDs for radio mail out, so if anything left over from that I'll sell until we don't have any more, and we just pretty much stick to vinyl.
Okay, does anyone else have a question?
You talked about setting up radio interviews for each city you hit. How do you go about doing that?
Your Shot Online has a good website that they do all like the charting for all of the campus community stations across Canada, and they also have the contact information. So you just reach out to the music director, and if you don't have any music out yet, you can still just be like, hey, my band's coming through town. You know, I'd like to pop in and do an interview or even just pop in and say hi. And just like meeting those people is a great foot in the door to like build a relationship with them later for next time you come through. But just contact the music director for any of the stations where you're playing. That's a good way to, or if you do have an album or whatever, like send it to them and ask them if they're willing to play it, and they always are.
Okay, anyone else? Wow. Okay.
What's the process like in flying with gear, and what's that like, and what things to know?
You have to pay to check luggage now, like for any of your checked bags. And so for guitars anyways, that's a checked bag. So that's like $60 or something. And I now always do gate checking for my guitar, just because there's been so many horror stories, I feel like, lately of things getting smashed. So if you just know that's at the gate with you, then you can pick it up afterwards. One thing I've been trying to figure out, I'm still kind of figuring this out myself, is my pedal board. And whether that should be my carry-on, like depends how long you're going away somewhere and how much stuff you need. Because like you want to check another thing. So I brought my pedals separate in my suitcase and just set them up on stage. But that is like such a hassle. And if you're playing a festival where you're doing a quick changeover, it can just be so ridiculous. So I'm kind of trying to navigate the best way to fly now that you don't get a free checked bag anymore. Because it can kind of add up. Yeah,
we're still figuring out as well. It is something you kind of just need to budget for. It's like, okay, we're going to have like over baggage here because there's no other way. But there are companies, say you're flying to the US, there's companies that like backline rental companies. So, you're not going to fly with your amp.
Oh yeah.
Or you're not going to fly with like a keyboard stand. So there's things that you'll rent when you get to a city that then the way the company works is like you can pick it up in this city and then drop it off in another city and then fly home kind of thing.
And another thing, I should have added that in, for drums, like a drummer's breakables, you can rent when you land. So we used to fly with the cymbals and a snare as well, but now my drummer has started the last 2 festivals we've flown out to renting a snare and cymbals, and that just saves so much space and so much less hassle, like to and from the airport.
We definitely get creative with it, though, in terms of like what we're doing with carry-ons. We'll kind of like stuff bags in other bags, and like our drummer has like a big like sort of backpack thing for his cymbals, and he'll like tuck like things underneath. Like we're essentially like cheating the system a little bit, but it's okay.
When you used to get one free checked bag, I usually have 2 guitars, and so now when I fly, I only bring one because I don't know what else to do. But I used to duct tape my guitar cases together because they were basically like too telly sized. And so like sometimes people like shake their heads, but a lot of times they would just let me. I mean, wouldn't charge me extra. They still let me get away, and that was a trick that another touring band told me they did. But since I've got different shaped ones, like I've got like a V and like a Firebird, like I'm not going to risk taping those together, as they're not going to bite. But there's ways to be creative. This is what I'm getting at.
All right. Any other? Yeah.
What advice can you give for the dilemma with like having shows booked internationally or U.S. far away that you have to get there versus not having shows booked locally and trying to find them? If you kind of understand that question.
I've never actually booked internationally. I've just in Canada, so I'm just going to hand that over.
What do you mean exactly?
Okay, so I'm in a dilemma right now where I'm struggling to find shows locally, but I have shows booked internationally or in the US, only I have to get there. So struggling on like the low budget already of trying to find, like you've got the show, so you have an opportunity, but you've got to find a way to get there with the expenses of that versus saving your expenses of the traveling and trying to find more shows locally, which sometimes usually is harder. Just your kind of advice with that. I know the grant is one way, but I mean other ways other than that kind of thing.
That does sound super challenging. I guess it's one of those things where if you feel like playing that show is going to lead to future opportunities that are going to help your career significantly, then you sort of need to look at it like an investment. And I think that's sort of what all touring early on for bands is an investment. You have to know that you're not going to, probably aren't going to make much money, if any. And so if you have like some cool shows in the States lined up and you think that there's with cool locals and there's like real promoters on and you're going to get your foot in the door, you might just need to be like, all right, I'm just going to go and do this and make the most out of it by inviting out people to come see you and trying to, reach out to labels or agents that are based in that area and invite them to the show. But it is a risk for sure. And it's expensive. So that's definitely challenging.
But if there's people that want to see you play in those places, like you should develop that market. Like playing locally might be, easier on your wallet, but if there's a bigger opportunity out there that you could turn into something even bigger, I think you should. It's an investment, and I think it's worth following up rather than trying to like be cool in your hometown. If you've got something cool elsewhere that you could also do.
Also, if you're like getting the proper visa to go and perform in the US or elsewhere, like you should try to make the most of it in terms of like, don't just go for one show, like try to book around it, try to book in other cities that are close by. So even if that show that you thought at first was going to be like the big deal, like maybe it's not that good, but at least you have these other shows where you make new connections and that kind of thing. So try to make the most out of it.
Awesome. Anybody else have a question?
So, Miesha, you talked a bit about sleeping in a van because you have that ability. Where do you park the van to sleep?
Walmart is a really good one because they open up early, and so you've got like access to a bathroom. It's not as easy for me to go find somewhere to pee as it is for my drummer, who's a guy. So being close to a bathroom is a big deal for me wherever we park. Walmart's open early. They got coffee, they got breakfast, and they got bathrooms. So that's really nice at like 7 a.m. Otherwise, sometimes you'll get that offer to crash at someone's house. You don't really know what it's like till you get there. We'll just be like, oh, you know what? Our van's more comfortable. We'll sleep in the van. Can you leave the door open so we can come in? But yeah, Walmart's really been pretty good to us, so I'm not going to slam it.
All the things they say about Walmart are now untrue. They help touring musicians.
Well, I have a question, but one thing I will say about Walmart is make sure it's on public property, because I've slept by accident on private because it was attached to a mall, and I got woken up at 2 a.m. by security telling me I need to leave. So
I always look for another RV. If there's an RV out there, then I think you're in the clear.
Yeah. But my question, how do you start building a fan base in untapped cities if you're just like at that venue for one night?
I guess you start with that one night and you get to know people at that show and get to know the promoter and the other artists that you get to play with. And then the next time you go back, you know a few more people. And it's kind of just something that you develop over time. I don't think your first time in any city, you're going to just have a fan base.
Yeah, a radio interview is a cool way to do it. Or like, it's not going to solve all your issues with not being known in a city, but that's sort of an access point at least. So if you can, before the show, reach out to a radio station in the city you're playing and be like, hey, I'm coming through on this date. I have this new song. It would be awesome if you could play it. Then at least there's some people who are like music minded who have heard of you or have heard your music, and they'll be like, oh, they're playing at this place. I'm going to go check it out and bring a friend or whatever.
Like the local paper too, like any kind of publicity stuff that you can follow up on.
But yeah, it is like challenging for sure, and it's all about just like going and doing it and meeting people and then doing it again, and
like sort of treat it like you do when you first start playing in your own home city. You know, you don't necessarily know everybody right away, and so you have to start playing as much as you can and getting to know who the people in the scene are, and just sort of do the same thing with every other place that you visit on tour.
All right. Any more questions?
Could everybody hear me? What about targeted Facebook ads in a new city?
I haven't had a ton of positive experience from that doing anything extra, but like Gil was saying before, if you can get a local promoter to do that, they have a better reach in their own city and maybe take a bit off the back end for that. It's a good way to utilize that tool in the best way, I think.
Anyone else? Any more questions? Okay. All right. I think that's everything. If anyone has something while I'm closing up, you can shoot your hand up. But that was great. That was all really good information. Whoa. Sorry, I guess I'm tired now. All that, my brain hurts. Just so everyone knows, this has been streamed live. And oh wait, okay, no, it's not time to wrap up. Okay, one more question. This will be the last one.
What makes a good touring company or touring agent or booking agent? Like when we're looking to develop a business relationship or a partnership or relationship in general with them, what are certain things that we should be looking for, or questions maybe that we can ask, or things like that that we should look for when we're building those partnerships?
I book all of my own shows right now, and I am kind of interested in that because it is like a shit ton of work to do this all yourself all the time. One of the things I'm kind of looking for when I'm meeting with other booking agents and stuff is, are they going to work as hard as I do on this and get the same kind of results that I can already get, or is it going to be something better? So better results would mean like better deals, shows on the nights I want in the venues and in the cities at the venues that I want, that kind of thing. So I just kind of look for what have they've achieved in the past and what's like realistic they can achieve for me now.
Yeah, one thing that's really important to me in my band is if someone gets back to our emails or calls quickly, it shows they care and are going to take the time. Because there's a lot of people that will sort of like express sort of loose interest in working with you, and then you'll be like, hey, all right, like let's do this tour, like I have all this planned, and then like you won't hear from them for a month or something, and it's like that's probably not a person you want to be working with. But obviously, like if someone's able to get you like opening for larger artists, and that's a huge thing, which really only like more established agents can do, is sort of get you those support slots, which go a super long way for getting you in front of larger crowds and that kind of thing. So yeah, but it's really like important to be on a personal level, like comfortable with them, and you can tell that they actually care about your project and are gonna work hard, and they're not just stringing you along to get a couple guarantees here and there.
I wanted to add something that we didn't really end up talking about, but like I know we've been talking a lot about saving money on the road and how to like sleep in these places and only spend this much on food and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you're going on tour to put on your best performance and like show everybody how kick butt you are and make new fans and everything. And so if that means you need to like go out for like a nice meal and a few beers, like treat yourself, because your sanity is kind of what's really going to carry you through the rest of the tour. And like, don't be afraid to like, I just need a hotel tonight. If you just need that and that's going to make your show that much better for the rest of the week, like do it.
Great point. We actually have to wrap up now. But Gil and Miesha will be hanging around after, so feel free to ask them some more questions. Like I was saying before, this is all live streamed. It is available on our website afterwards. So if you weren't taking notes and you forget something and you want to go back to it, it will be available to you. I also wanted to say that we have surveys that they were at the very front when you came in. If you didn't grab one and you could do that and fill it out, that would be wonderful. That just kind of helps us to know if we're on the right track, or if you have ideas of workshops that you would like. It's always good to know that, because sometimes I just can't think of everything that people want to learn. So I love suggestions. So just be sure to fill those out. And you can just, I have like a little tray that I'll put by the snacks, and you can put the completed surveys in there. And then of course a reminder that our workshop season has just begun. There's so many more coming up. This is the first of the DIY series. We also have Equalizer, which is an audio production workshop for women and non-binary people. We have Decipher, which is a hip-hop professional development workshop. We also have Manitoba Country Music Meeting, which is happening in November for country musicians. Actually, it's really interesting, because even if that's not your genre, I'd still recommend coming to them, because I learned something new at every workshop that I'm moderating, and the same things that apply to country music, they apply to hip hop music, and the same things that apply to hip hop music apply to what these two are doing as well. So I highly recommend you check those out. Look at all the panelists that we have coming in, and I guess I will just leave it at that. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.